When I'm asked to explain the difference between conservatives and the left, I say it's about consequences. The left tend to worry about how things seem, conservatives more about how things work. In Australia, the most dramatic example was when a Labor government under Kevin Rudd said John Howard's border policies to stop the boats, they seemed heartless, and they scrapped them. Rudd wanted to seem good, but what actually happened then was terrible. The boats returned. More than 50,000 illegal immigrants sailed in, many fake refugees in my opinion. Worse, 1,200 boat people were lured to their deaths at sea, drowned trying to get here. And now America's new president has done much the same dumb thing. When he was campaigning against Donald Trump, Joe Biden said Trump's policies to wall off America's border with Mexico, to lock up illegal immigrants coming in, seemed heartless. Biden would change it.
We should not be locking people up. We should be making sure we change the circumstance, as we did, why they would leave in the first place. And those who come seeking asylum, we should immediately have the capacity to absorb them, keep them safe until they can be heard.
I would, in fact, make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come.
I would also move to increase the total number of immigrants able to come to the United States.
Sure enough, Biden softened the laws, and people down south of America, they sure saw what was going on. They believed Biden, and that prompted a flood of illegal immigrants from as far as South America to come across the border from Mexico to the United States. The numbers are amazing, around 175,000 people a month now, and rising, cramming detention centres to overflowing, prompting 20 Republican governors yesterday to demand that Biden fix this crisis. I spoke earlier today to Annelise Nielsen, our US correspondent, who's been at the Texas border with Mexico. Annelise Nielsen, thank you so much for joining me. We have now had 20 Republican governors from across America call on the Biden administration to do more to stop this crisis along the border with Mexico. Can you describe this crisis to us?
Well, Andrew, it's interesting because the national discussion here, especially when it falls along political lines, is that you can't actually call it a crisis. That's been something that the Republicans have pressured the Democrats to do, although I can tell you on the ground here, no one's falling short of calling it a crisis. What they're saying is that they do want immediate action. Again, those letters from the governors do fall along party lines, but what we are seeing is that this is a nationwide problem, and that's representative of right where we are now. We're about an hour north of the southern border of Texas. Now, the southern border is where we see all those pictures of migrants crossing the Rio Grande, getting picked up by customs and border officials. But what you see there is they seek them out. They want to be picked up and processed so that they can claim asylum. Further north here, this is where law enforcement's coming into confrontation with people smugglers, and they often use groups of migrants coming up from Mexico, many of them from Central America, as cover because they have people who, among them, will be smuggling drugs or engaging in people smuggling, and the people that have signed up don't know about this. So this is where it gets really complicated. This area is where we've seen confrontations with police running, migrants running away from law enforcement through backyards here. This is a front of mind issue for people. I've had one gentleman tell me he doesn't mow his lawn now without wearing a firearm because he's been confronted by so many groups of people coming up across the border, and they do knock on doors asking for water and food. So this is a really extraordinary time, but the numbers are very alarming as well. It's over 750,000 that have come across the border this year alone in the first 4 months. That's more than the just under 500,000 that came in last year in total. And this has really been seen as a bottleneck coming up from the Trump administration's very hardline border policy.
Well, the monthly totals already are amazing, and we're told that they're probably going to be increasing as America moves into summer. What is causing this?
Well, it depends who you talk to. We've spoken to some people who work for non-profit organisations who work with local immigrants. They say that these numbers are artificially inflated because people were getting sent back at such regularity under the Trump administration. They were waiting on the other side of the Mexican border. And when things opened up, when Joe Biden came in with more compassionate language, it was their time to go. But that's not what we're hearing from others as well, especially on the other side of the political spectrum. They say that this is the time now that people smugglers see a very lucrative business model. And that's been the universal concern of people we've spoken to here. They're not necessarily anti-immigration. There's very strong Mexican culture along the border, of course, and plenty of Central Americans who've settled in the United States as well. Their concern is that this is funding cartels and that they have a complete control over who comes across the border.
We heard earlier, a couple of weeks ago, the White House spokeswoman blame Donald Trump for what we're seeing.
Like COVID, obviously a different issue, but we recognize this is a big problem. The last administration left us a dismantled and unworkable system. And like any other problem, we are going to do everything we can to solve it.
Is she right?
It's that exact argument I was saying about the bottleneck, but also this is quite a toxic issue for the Democrats. This is their first genuine crisis, and so they're falling back on what's been a pretty tried and tested ploy in politics, which is to blame the other side. There's always been a very haphazard approach to immigration in the United States. This has gone backwards and forwards for generations, and a lot of these issues, even those among Democrats will acknowledge, first came up during Barack Obama's administration when there was that more lenient approach again. It was Joe Biden put in charge of it, but it really didn't come down until it was under the Trump administration. What they're going to do now is say that they're going to focus on building up some of those some of those economic issues in Central American countries to try and counter the reason that people are leaving. But these are deep-seated issues. When we were in Mexico, we saw a number of factories around the border that were American factories built to support local workers. But when people are fleeing drug cartels, when they're fleeing domestic violence, there's a level of desperation that it would be hard to counter with economic investment. So returning to Jen Psaki's commentary, it's not completely unreasonable, but it certainly doesn't address the core issue, and that's what's been the one thing we've heard here is that they want the Biden administration to come down and see for themselves, because it is really hard to understand what this problem is like unless you see it for yourself.
Of course, Joe Biden has hand-passed this to his Vice President Kamala Harris, who I don't think has gone down to the border to check. They say that they're doing a lot of good by moving children out of the detention centres, but it seems that they're actually just being moved somewhere else. They're not actually, there's still this problem of unaccompanied minors being brought across the border, presumably as anchors for their families to follow.
It's a huge problem. It's not just children acting as anchors, often that they're being sent over the border with the hope that a relative will take them in. These are very desperate families. We went down to Reynosa, just under the Mexican border, and spoke with people at a migrant camp there. One woman said that her daughter was already in America and they were trying to get across with her son, and the son had really been raised by the older daughter, and so their family felt really torn apart by that instance. They were in a domestic violence situation that meant that they were really unsafe in their home country, and it's just showing how nuanced these cases are, how complicated they can be. And another woman we spoke to was desperate to get back together with her son, who'd gone over with the dad and got separated from the dad on that crossing because they can be quite chaotic. So none of this is simple. No one's saying that it's going to have an easy solution, that if Kamala Harris came down here for a visit, that all of a sudden everything would be fixed. But what people are saying is that they want something to change urgently because they think that this is very much a crisis.
Annelise Nielsen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.